This is the rate of change video part 3. And you can do this on notebook paper. There's no need for graph paper. It's probably easier to do it on notebook paper. So let's start by making a graph. And I want you to plot the points 1, 2 and 5, 9. Again, that's 1, 2, 5, 9. And pause the video and then turn it back on when you've done that. And let's find the slope of this. It's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Of course, that's 9 minus 2, 5 minus 1. Gives us a slope of 7/4. Also remember, this is an important concept for this chapter. That's the change in y over the change in x. And you can clearly see that on the graph, that y moves up 7 as x goes over 4. So again, y moves up 7 as x moves over 4. Now, what if on this graph we just used letters instead of numbers? So let's make this point A, the 1. Let's make this point B. What would we call this point? Well, in calculus language, this corresponding y value would be f of a. Right? Because if you plug a into the function, you're going to get 2. So that point is f of a. So this point is f of b. Okay, so f of a is the y value that corresponds with a. F of b is the y value that corresponds with b. Now, can we write a formula for slope using our calculus letters? How would you represent y2? Wouldn't y2 be f of b? So we could write it as f of b. How could you represent y1? You could represent y1 with f of a. And then x2 would be b. x1 would be a. So this formula is another formula for slope. It's actually exactly the same. We just wrote it more in a calculus style instead of in an algebra style. So let's look at this graph. So draw yourself, leave some extra space because we're going to be returning to this graph. And let's draw a new graph. And let's draw a line, maybe not as steep as the last one. And just mark 2 arbitrary points on it. I'd like you to label the f of b, f of a, b, and a on this graph. And I'll pause the video for a second if you'd like, and then come back and check your answer. So you would label this as, we usually label the x's first. A, and this is b, and this would be f of a, and this y value here would be f of b. And so if I ask you to find the slope of this, you could write f of b minus f of a over b minus a. It's exactly the same as saying y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It's exactly the same thing as saying that we want the change in y over the change in x. And then let's do it backwards. Let's pretend like we did have numbers to go with this graph. So let's say that this was 5, and this x value is 8. And let's say that this y value is 3, and that this y value is 7. So what would our slope be? would be 7 minus 3 over 8 minus 5. So we'd get a slope of 4/3. So let's look back at the first graph again. And let's be just a little bit different than we were a second ago. So we're back to this first graph with the 9 and the 2. So f of b minus f of a over b minus a. Let's change b minus a to just be delta x. So let's now write this as f of b minus f of a over delta x, which is just the change from b to a. Does that make sense? We agree that b minus a is the same as the change in x. And so then let's actually go another step and let's fill this in. What is f of b? Let's just actually write that it's, what was b? b was 5. So we want f of 5 minus f of a was 1, over the change in x, and that was just 4. Okay, now we can find f of 5, right? We happen to know that it's 9. We can find, we can find f of 1. We happen to know that it's 2. But we're going to leave our form just like this for now. We're not going to go ahead and do the whole slope. Okay, and so then let's back up a little bit to the graph we did right after that, where we had the points 5, 3 and 8, 7. And so let's also now write this as f of b minus f of a. Instead of b minus a, let's write it just over the change of x. Okay, so that would be f of b would be f of 8. Right, remember the x value is what goes in the parentheses. So f of 8 minus f of 5. And we want all that over the change in x. What was the change in x? You can just tell by looking. It's 3. Okay, let's do, I think I have one more of those to do. Let's just do one more of those to get used to that. So let's draw a new graph. And by the way, leave some space because we're going to come back to that graph also. So let's draw a new graph that looks like this. Let's use a point here at 0, 2. And let's have a point at 7, 6. So that's 0, 2, 7, 6. So instead of actually figuring out the slope right now, let's just let's just use the harder way to do it. So let's do the f of b minus f of a. And again, remember that's just y2 minus y1 over the change in x. So first of all, what's our change in x? We went from 0 to 7. So that's 7. And let's just rewrite f of b as 6. F of 7. And f of a is going to be f of 0. Right, because these are our two x values. So this is x2 and this is x1. So it's just another way to write the slope formula. It's the same as y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And if it'll help you remember it better, stop the camera for a minute, or stop the tape for a minute, and actually do the x2 minus x1 and y2 minus y1. So let's go back to our first example again. let's say that we were not permitted to use f of b. So somebody came along and said, I don't want you to use f of b. Could we actually do this without using f of b? And the answer is we can, because f of b is always just a plus the change in x. So b is always a plus change in x. What's change in x here? It's 4, right? So your delta x in this first graph equals 4. So a equals 1, b actually equals a plus delta x equals 1 plus 4 equals 5. B is always going to be a plus delta x. So we could actually rewrite this yet another way, which would be f of a plus delta x minus f of a all over delta x. Again, that sounds a little crazy, but it works. So f of a plus delta x, that'd be f of a plus 4. So that would be f of 5, right? A plus 4 minus f of a, which is f of 1, all over delta x, which is 4. Hope you can see what I just wrote. Let me do that again. F of a plus delta x, which would be 5, minus f of a, which is the same as f of 1, all over delta x. So feel free to back the video up and look at that again if that confused you. But let's do it on the second graph we looked at. So go to your second graph. And let's figure out the other way to write b. So b can equal a plus delta x. And what is delta x in this case? Well, what's the difference from 5 to 8? Delta x equals 3, right? That's the change in x from 5 to 8. So b must equal a plus 3 equals 8. That works. Okay, so it's just another way of writing b as a plus delta x. And this is important because we're going to use this a lot coming up. So this is just getting used to the language.